But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Good morrow to you, lads and lasses, and welcome to HBR News number 167. Elton John and Prince Harry protect the men's? I am your host, Brian Martinez, and I am here with my esteemed alt-right entitled, rape apologizing, room cleaning, incel, red pill, Reddit posting, fedora tipping, fascist Pepe loving, Trump supporting, Nazi apologizing, This America memeing, woman enslaving poo-poo heads to look at the best feels, funnies, and what the fucks to discuss clam slam badger style. Let's get started, shall we? Let's just jump right into it. So today's polecat panel consists of Hannah Wallen of the land of the Punopulous or whatever, and Mike, he's coming at us from the warm and sunny London. Actually, all of these places are warm and sunny right now, and myself, the Supreme Doge in Charge, also from the baking hot Chirac. But we also have a special guest. Please welcome Desiree. She is from the YouTube channel called, I believe, Just Thinking Out Loud. Is that correct, Desi?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to welcome Desiree to the show.
We haven't got an avatar.
Yeah, we don't. She's
you have to be the phone. You're the phone that's on the desk there on the left.
Oh no.
Be the TV. You want to be the TV?
You can be the TV screen. That's fine. There's an empty chair where Mike would normally be sitting. Mike J, that is. He's not here right now. Unfortunately, he got swept up in jury duty. So he has to do stuff for the man, and we can't really get him out of there. But I'm sure that Desiree will make for a fine and entertaining guest to discuss the topics and maybe provide an interesting point of view. So we have a really good show lined up for you guys today. So please be sure to continue the conversations both in the chat and in the comment section. On this week's HBR News Show, we'll be looking at... We're going to be talking about Elon Musk's comments towards one of the British divers that was rescuing children, the MRAs that are fighting discrimination in California, a woman who hired 3 assassins to kill her son, and more. So stick around for the details on those things. And also, if you're interested, you should join us on the patron-only after show, which is going to be as soon as this broadcast ends. So the story for the patron-only after show came to me via a recommendation by one of our patrons who sent me a story asking if I would be interested in it. And I had no idea that something like this existed, but I thought I would check it out. Basically, it is... from a blog called Day of the Woman, and is the after show. The blog is entitled "Unexpectedly Feminist Horror Films: John Carpenter's The Thing." So apparently, she's trying to make the case that the film The Thing by John Carpenter is actually a feminist movie, and it actually brought about an interesting thought. I thought I would play a new game. Do you guys remember when, I believe it was last show, I said I like to play this game where I would put in anything and then say is sexist and see if what articles come up, and almost everything comes up. Even feminism comes up. Even sexism comes up as sexist. Like anything you can think of, right? Well, now I'm thinking about trying another game. I'm thinking about trying another game where you put in anything and then write it's feminist. and see how much stuff comes up. And I'll tell you, it's a lot. It's actually a lot of stuff that is both sexist and feminist at the same time. Because this is how woke the internet gets.
I'm trying to think of something. Like MRAs are feminist. Oh yeah, they've said that loads of times. You shouldn't be MRAs, you should be feminist instead because they mean the same thing.
That's right.
Patriarchy isn't feminist. Actually, we've made that point. Occasionally, that if there is such a thing as a patriarchy, then feminism is a wing of it. So yeah, we'll get that argument too.
Michael Keller asks, he says, okay, Google, is Brian Martinez sexist? You know that that's going to come up, right? You know that. So with that said, we're going to look at, as an after show topic, we're going to be looking at, is The Thing the most feminist horror film ever? And maybe you'll stick around for that. If you'd like to, please consider becoming a patron by joining us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. And if you don't want to wake up one morning to find yourself unable to find our content because YouTube has finally dropped the axe on our channel, go to badgerfeed.com. That's badgerfeed.com. So we're going to go ahead and get into the stories. And Desi, you know, if you want to comment on anything, just jump right in. Since you're the guest, we'll give you priority. We're going to give you guest privilege. So we'll take your opinions on things first. Is that fair?
That sounds more than fair.
Okay, and if you have, you know, like, yeah, let's have fun with it. Just relax, just loosen up. I think I'm just telling myself that more than anything else, to be honest. All right, so first story. While the world watched as the rescue efforts were underway to assist a trapped Taiwanese soccer team from a flooded cave, many tried to lend assistance in any way they could. Entrepreneur and businessman Elon Musk attempted to help by offering an experimental miniature submersible. While most applauded Musk's efforts, British-born caver Vernon Unsworth was anything but impressed. Unsworth, resident of Chiang Rai, Thailand, and recreational cave explorer, was one of the first on the scene and was reported as being instrumental in the rescue operation. When he received word of Musk's efforts, he scoffed at them, stating that it was, quote, a PR stunt. Musk had no conception of what the cave passage was like, and that Musk could stick his submarine where it hurts. Not too happy with Unsworth's assertions, Musk fired back on Twitter saying, "Never saw this British guy who lives in Thailand at any point when we were in the caves. Only people in sight were the Thai Navy and Army guys, who were great. Thai Navy SEALs escorted us in, total opposite of wanting us to leave. Water level was actually very low and still, not flowing. You could literally have swum to Cave 5 with no gear, which is obvious how the kids got in. If not true, then I challenge this dude to show final rescue video. Huge credit to pump and generator team. Unsung heroes here." Then his last tweet goes, "You know what? Don't bother showing me video. We will make one of the mini sub/pod going all the way to K5, no problemo. Sorry, pedo guy. You really did ask for it." This outburst garnered much criticism towards Musk online. Unsworth is currently considering legal action against Musk for his disparaging remarks. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes. Go ahead.
I like Elon Musk from what I know of him. But also, I'm not a fan of the super uptight business sort of persona that I think maybe a lot of investors or news writing columnists want to see. I think it's very, it sounded like he was kind of throwing a mini tantrum. I don't know what his evidence is to call someone a pedo, but I also think that that guy that told him to stick it, what was it? Stick it where it hurts? Was that what he said?
Stick the submarine. He could stick his submarine where it hurts. Yeah.
I don't think that's much better, you know. So I don't see how he could be suing him or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. I think personally, I think that we're a little too quick to seek legal recourse for little things, and I'm saying that coming off of a legal case ourselves. But I think that where I see, I guess the bit that bugs me is the allegations of pedophilia can be extremely severe, and it would be one thing to just, I guess insult his intelligence, or just throw like some random I don't know, insult out there. But I think when you call a man a pedophile, you just do it in passing. It's like, it can be damaging, like especially in this sort of Me Too climate, and it's a little bit concerning. Although I think that with all the attention that this story has gotten, one would hope that that's actually not going to be something that will actually come out of this. People in the comments are saying that Musk is overhyped. But go ahead.
In this particular climate, pedo seems to have become the most popular name call of the right, whereas stuff like racist, sexist, misogynist is still the go-to for people on the left, and which isn't necessarily intrinsic of the left or right. It's just where people have found themselves. It's what you can still get away with calling people.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing the right can get away with calling people anymore is pedo. And the left are even working on that. They're even working on normalizing pedophilia. So there's nothing at all that the right can use anymore.
The really bad thing is throwing that word around lightly, just using it for anybody that you don't like that. That is a normalizing factor. It's just like misogyny has started to lose its meaning, and sexist is losing its meaning. And even racist, people are not taking accusations of racism seriously because everybody throws that word around like it doesn't mean anything. Like it's just, an insult. Oh, you're an asshole. You're a racist. What's the difference? Well, there used to be a pretty damn big difference, but not so much anymore. And we're going to see the same thing. I don't want to see the same thing happen with pedophile. I want that label to be an ultimate condemnation, and I want to see it only used against people who are actually pedophiles, and not just anybody that actually cares about kids or takes an interest in kids or interacts with kids, or that somebody's angry at. And I do think that it was actually worse of Musk to toss that word around like it doesn't mean anything, than it was of the diver who had been through an ordeal, who went to where those kids were. And that wasn't something that you just, there was one of the divers died going back and forth through that area. And this guy's back there, and he stayed with the kids. He took an interest in their welfare and watched them deal with their situation. And, there they are in that cave, starving, scared, and suffering. And out comes Elon Musk like he's going to be the hero of the day. I can understand why the guy might tell him to shove it. He's acting like he understands the situation when he necessarily doesn't. And that can be written off as speaking out because of his situation, and speaking out because he's actually in distress, and he's witnessing distress. And it's great that Musk cared and wanted to step in and be the hero and everything, but he didn't need to snap back like that. He should have taken a moment and thought about, where's this guy coming from when he says this stuff, and moved on, honestly. And I mean, the only other thing I can see in this is, in Musk, there's good and bad in every person, and there's good ideas and bad ideas from every person, and he has latched on to the feudalist, collectivist, universal basic income idea. And he's going to see solutions as top-down, not individual people working toward fixing problems, rescuing folks, dealing with issues, and so on. He's going to see business and government being the solution to everything. And so I can see him taking it personally that it wasn't in this situation. And that may have contributed to his behavior in this instance. But it's still absolute crap, no matter what your reasons are, aside from a person actually demonstrating a pedophilic tendency, to call someone a pedophile.
Desiree, did you want to say something else? Also, is it possible to raise the volume on your microphone? You're coming in a little lower than the rest of us, and or maybe you're just really soft spoken.
I can probably try to talk louder, but I don't think I can change the volume on the physical microphone, but
there are options in the Discord, I think, to raise your volume. You can probably try and do it in there. Or
it says it's at 100%, but I'll try and talk louder, or maybe hold it a bit closer or something.
Oh, I can raise your volume. Okay.
Okay.
Now, go ahead. Yeah, you're good. I raise your volume.
Okay. I think it's really interesting hearing your everyone else's responses, because the word pedo, in terms of using it liberally, didn't really stand out to me when I first read it, and I guess I feel bad after hearing what you guys said, because it's true. And I actually read a story, maybe you guys have heard of it, of I think it was 12-year-old girl in India who was being raped by guys who worked in some building. Well, one guy initially who worked in the building that her family lived in over like a 6-month period or something. And then the lawyers, I guess, it was like, how many guys was it? I think it was like a really high number, maybe 20, but I'm not quite sure. And it started with one guy, and then he brought other people. It was something like an inspector or something for the building. And that's really serious, and that's what actual pedophilia is. And in my mind, it's almost as if the word has already been desensitized down for me, because I didn't actually have that jump in my brain, which after listening to you guys, I'm definitely, rewinding the thoughts in my mind. But that's, yep. So I think.
I hear a lot of people saying stuff like pedophiles aren't human. They're less than human. They're subhuman sort of scum. And to some degree, fair enough. Yeah, you can't get much. If any human beings are going to get a bad label, it's the ones that hurt children. You can't get much worse than that. But what if you're wrong? It's much like the argument against the death penalty. What if you're wrong? What if this is a false accusation and you've just accused a regular human being of being less than human? That's what gives me pause when it comes to flinging this kind of stuff around,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't have a problem with people calling each other names or using, like, I guess what many would consider to be offensive speech. I usually become concerned when I think that there could be radically extreme responses to that speech. So accusing someone of being a pedophile, I'm not saying that Elon Musk necessarily made an accusation. He just put that in as an insult. Maybe his tweet only had room for 4 more letters, and he didn't know that you could just call somebody a dick or something. He just used pedo instead. But that, it's, I don't care that people call each other stuff like that personally, because I'm a free speech absolutist. But those are when you call a man a pedophile, or if you accuse him of rape, or if you accuse him of there are certain things you can accuse somebody of that can they can ruin that person's life. And so and even though I would like to believe that, no matter what you're accused of, you deserve due process. If we're gonna move beyond simple name calling, I think that we should engage in due process to figure out if this is actually a justified accusation. But that's why I mentioned the Me Too thing, because in light of this sort of grievance culture that we live in, where an accusation towards a person, if it is severe enough, is actually can result in some really extreme consequences that may not be deserved. So I guess the main reason why I even chose this story, because really this is kind of petty stuff, but it was because of the casual use of the word pedo towards a man who was just trying to help young boys. And that's another thing too. There's a stigma of adult men that want to work with or help or be in the presence of younger children. And there is a stigma of that. Like the men who work, for example, in daycare, there is a stigma against it. You know, there was a law, or not a law, I think it was like a policy rule at one airline, and I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but I remember this from a couple of years back, where children could not sit next to men on airlines that they didn't know. Like, you know, if you were a man on an airplane and there was an empty seat next to you, a child couldn't sit there. But if you were a woman, a child could. So we have this weird stigma towards men already. There's a lot of negativity towards men being around young people. That's why I think it's one of the reasons why there are as many male teachers in the early years, but I think there's more male professors like later on. So I think this is like part of a larger, I guess you could say it's like a grain of sand in a larger conversation. And that's why I thought it was worth pointing out to say, look, it's a small story, but I'm like, well, you know, could this have some this is why the guy's responding, I think, with legal action, because I think even he recognizes that if someone with as much influence and popularity and, fame as Elon Musk casually calls him a pedo, it could have ramifications on his life. And maybe that's why he feels as though he needs to respond with legal action. It could be because he's afraid that this could have an effect on him, even though the only thing he wanted to do was help some young boys.
For future reference, Elon, if it's just about the bants, then go with Virgin. Go with fuck you Virgin or something like Dankula.
Yeah.
It's just more palatable than fuck you pedo, you know?
Yeah.
I want to point out on the free speech absolutism front, Karen pointed something out in a podcast I listened to recently, because it actually made the Drudge Report. So I wanted to hear what she said that made the Drudge Report. But in any case, she actually pointed out, free speech isn't freedom from consequences. And while in our instance, in the United States, free speech means the government cannot censor you from political speech. It doesn't mean that if you slander somebody, you're exempt from legal consequences or any other kind of consequences for your slander. And that's a completely different situation than just political speech or criticism or discussion of a topic. It becomes an attack on another person that actually can do damage. The minute you do damage to somebody, real damage, not just hurt feelings, where you put somebody at risk of having their life changed because you leveled an accusation or you implied an accusation in a very open way like that, that is going to change people's opinions of the individual wrongfully, then consequences apply. That doesn't mean you didn't have the freedom to say it. It means your freedom to say it doesn't negate the consequences.
Agree with that. I mean, I'm a free speech absolutist, but I do think that when you that doesn't mean that you can use it to essentially destroy somebody else, because that's still, that there's the lying about people, the libel or slander is the thing that's the problem, not necessarily the words. So I know that one is the tool to make the other happen, but I agree with what you're saying is what I'm saying. So anyway, we should move on to the next story, because the next one's actually going to create more discussion, I think, but it's a good one. All right. So there was a New York Times article previously titled, "He Too, a Fight for Men's Rights in California Courts." It starts by describing a man involved in many discrimination cases as a key player in a movement of men's rights activists challenging female-focused businesses, marketing strategies, educational programs, and civic projects that have surged since the election of President Blumpf in November of 2016 and the hashtag #MeToo movement. This man, Rich Allison, has been a plaintiff in many lawsuits which cite discrimination against men in violation of California's Unruh Civil Rights Act. The article cites him as believing in social justice and fairness, and that he came to the men's rights movement after observing that popular culture is diminishing the importance of men in families and society. The article lays out his connection to the National Coalition for Men, talking briefly about the coalition's president, Harry Crouch, and a paternity fraud case. In a section called, quote, Testing the Man Tax, the article cites Mr. Allison as saying, quote, I have never filed a case that has been frivolous or anything like that, and then lists a sampling rather cheekily, quoted from the article. All right. In 2010, Mr. Allison was a plaintiff on a class action civil rights suit filed against the heavy metal band Five Finger Death Punch, House of Blues, and Live Nation after he, Mr. Crouch, Mr. Chandelure, and Jackie Durazo, who was then an in-law of Mr. Candelare's, they went to the band's Chicks for Free concert, and the men were charged $27 for admission, but Mr. Durazo was not, because it was a women get in free event. Quote, they ambulance chase these events and make a little money for themselves, said Alan Kovac, now the manager of the band. This sort of thing is a stain on laws that are meant to level the playing field. Again from the article. In 2013, Mr. Allison, along with Mr. Crouch, Mr. Candelore, and another plaintiff named Jeff Perowin, sued Madras Country Club in Poway, California, as well as a company called Women on Course for hosting a recurring networking event for women called Clinic and Cocktail. Another example from the article. A few months later, the same group and Carolyn Bell, the NCFM membership coordinator, sued El Mundo de Tango, a restaurant and bar in San Diego, after the men were required to pay a cover charge, and Miss Bell was not. Mr. Allison also sued a career development company called Ladies Get Paid. The female founder says the company, quote, was intended as a safe zone where women could speak openly about money and issues contributing to pay disparities and uncomfortable gender dynamics at work. To avoid the court finding a civil rights violation, the company settled the case and changed the policy. Behind almost all of this litigation is a lawyer named Alfred G. Rava, 62, formerly a secretary of NCFM. He has filed some 300 Unruh cases. The article closes with the story of a man who may have took umbrage to even be mentioned in an article about men's rights activism, as the author was clear to specify he self-identifies as a, quote, liberal pro-gender equality feminist, end quote. I don't know how that's different from MRA, but apparently it's different and better. Anyway, Mr. Rava filed a class action Unruh lawsuit on behalf of this man, Lawrence Pollister, 29, after a November 2017 comedy show for a female-only audience performed by Eliza Schlesinger. Eliza Schlesinger is a comedian that I've talked about on the show before, who used to do really funny bits where she would talk about female nature, and it was very funny stuff. And then she found feminism and became really, really unfunny almost overnight. After a November 2017 comedy show for female, this was for Eliza Schlesinger at a theater in Los Angeles. He had bought tickets with his female friend and met up with her there, only to be turned away at the door. He told an employee working at the club, quote, oh no, honey, I'm just one of the girls. I'm gay, end quote. To no avail. He said he was humiliated and upset to be excluded. He told the New York Times his motivation to sue was purely political. Quote, I don't want someone to say, I won't bake a cake for you because you're gay. How is that different from saying, I won't let you in this theater because you're a man? All right. So that's the story. Basically, we're looking at a series of lawsuits for situations which men are excluded, i.e. discriminated against, from attending certain events or going to clubs, or they're charged in places where women are not, things like that. And, you know, this is a tough one for me because, I mean, I guess it's not really that tough. See, I know what the guys at NCFM, at least these guys here, are trying to I guess, examine or display. But I'm of the opinion that I'm the kind of guy that says if you don't want to bake the cake, you don't have to bake the cake. Because I believe in, you know, like, people should be able to discriminate if they want to, unless they are government bodies. Then that's a whole different animal, right? As an individual, privately owned companies should be able to discriminate if they want to. It may not make me happy, but I think that is what you want if you're going to operate a free society. I know that some of the stuff that comes up and then it's not very frequent, but sometimes the discussion of, you know, ladies' night is unfair, or, you know, why is it women get charged less on these days, and, you know, these sorts of things. You know, why are there women-only spaces? I don't think that I don't care about those things. I think that it would be nice if men were allowed spaces too, if they wanted them. And I think that there's definitely something that you could complain about when men try to create clubs or spaces and then women want to, like, get in. When I say women, I'm more specifically talking about feminist women, because they don't like the idea that men have their own spaces. But I don't really care if, like, Eliza Schillinger or Schlesinger wants to do a women-only show. She's welcome to do it. She's not going to make that much money. At the end of the day, these sort of discriminatory approaches don't tend to be very profitable. So they don't usually work out, especially if there's competition. That's one of the main reasons why I'm okay with the guy not baking the cake, as it were, which is, I think this is what we're looking at here. I guess I get what they're trying to do, but I don't necessarily agree that that's actually a very important cause.
Well, it's the authoritarian position. It literally is the authoritarian position to protest and to get people's rights taken away. So of course it's not going to go down well. This is the problem. The opposing position, the libertarian position, would be to hold a men's only night and see what happens.
Yeah.
And you'll see what happens, and then hopefully you'll expose the hypocrisy. But in that situation, you probably won't, because they're so separated. You'll be there in the court saying, all right, I know you're suing me for holding an all men's night, but did you know there are all women's nights all over the place? And then you'll have to fight it out in court, and good luck with that. I mean, it's not unwinnable, but
this article,
like I say, the libertarian approach is what we've been doing for some time now. I can't blame people for snapping and taking the authoritarian approach, you know. Although I wouldn't agree with it necessarily.
This article was really sneaky, to be honest. National Coalition for Men, their lawsuits, like when they mentioned 300 lawsuits, you notice they only cited a handful of them.
Sure.
And that is because the majority of their lawsuits are not of this kind. They've done things like suing to prevent discrimination against men in the domestic violence victims advocacy industry. That's a mouthful. And I'm having dry mouth issues today, sorry. But in any case, they've sued for a whole range of things that are actually deeper than this. These lawsuits, half their purpose isn't so much to end women-only things as to demonstrate to the women who are insisting that men can't have men-only things that if they're going to set a standard like this, it has to go both ways. And if women are going to fight simultaneously for a right to have women-only things and a right to be included in everything men do, such that men don't have men-only things, they're going to lose that fight, no matter what, because they can't word laws to allow both of those things without openly admitting that they're asking for discrimination. So these people that covered the National Coalition for Men, they're real clever about what they wrote about, because they didn't want to actually talk about the issues that these guys are actually dealing with. Another one of the things that they've been working on is degendering the draft, which feminists would actually be fighting for too, at least some of them. There are still some feminists that are not wanting to fight to degender the draft, but selective service is discriminatory. And it's egregiously discriminatory because what it is a requirement that men alert the government to how to find and contact them for a demand that they put their lives on the line for government war. And it's not necessarily, you can't necessarily say that it's for their country, because in the last century, the draft has been used about 3 times, I believe, to force men, possibly 4 times, to force men into wars that were not necessarily all for the good of the country. And I mean, it's arguably Vietnam, we didn't really have to be there at all. And if we hadn't been involved in World War I, it's entirely possible that none of the other wars in the century would have happened. So it's good that they are fighting these battles. And it's very sneaky of these writers that cover stuff like this to paint this narrative and look at this select few suits and paint them as the main thing this group does, and get you to only look at it as, is it right for men to stop women from having women-only things, or is it a social justice warrior kind of thing? It's very much like when Oxford put their rape accusation form online for the publicly available for all to see. The way that 4chan and some of the men's rights subreddit let them know that that was a broken thing, a bad idea to do, was to pile onto it until they demonstrated that it was dysfunctional. And of course, feminists bitched about that too. They bitched about that really, really piteously, especially Man Boobs, the writer for We Hunted the Mammoth. But the guys were right. Putting that up as a public thing made it possible for anybody anywhere to make an accusation against somebody anonymously, without any recourse for the accused and without any consequences to the accuser. And that was bad. This is bad too. This idea that women should simultaneously have women-only things, but have as a condition of the law that men cannot have men-only things, that's bad. So I applaud them for demonstrating conclusively how the system is broken and what is wrong with it.
Desiree, did you want to say anything?
Well, I wanted to ask something. Are there any instances where the genders are switched, where women have sued men for something similar? I can't think off the top of my head of events where women have to pay a cover charge and men don't, or anything like that. But have there been cases that females have sued?
All over the United States, yeah. Yeah, that's actually, I'm not going to give you one off the top of my head, but that occurred throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Women have repeatedly sued to not be excluded from male-only things. And that includes one thing I can give you, women have actually sued for the right to be allowed into locker rooms where men are changing clothes after a sporting event, if they are reporters, under the claim that they can't get the story outside the locker room. They can't get people to interview with them outside the locker room. That's their claim. So they want the right to go into the locker room where the men are naked, and then they have turned around and called the men's nudity sexual harassment. So they not only do they sue to not be excluded from male only things, they've actually sued to get into places like no man would have the right to go into a women's locker room where women are naked. And if he did get that right, nobody would take him seriously, claiming that their nudity was abuse.
I think in that case, then I would have no problem with them. I don't think it's petty or anything for them to be making what some people would call frivolous lawsuits, bringing those lawsuits up?
I think the point of them is to sort of draw attention to the double standard. And I agree with Hannah. Like, most of the work that NCFM does isn't stuff like this. It's actually like helping, with paternity fraud and discrimination in divorce courts and child custody and things like this that are very important and very good for men, and they do really great work there. And I think that the New York Times, there's a New York Times article, they're trying to draw attention to the stuff that is the easiest to sort of dismiss, which is the sort of complaining about, ladies' nights and things like that. And I guess the thing that I was thinking about is that, maybe we shouldn't be making those arguments. I mean, I'm certainly not going to make those arguments like there shouldn't be ladies' nights or anything like that. As far as when are there cases when women have sued more, I would add on top of what Hannah was saying, is that a lot of the times women don't have to sue because men they'll usually, even though they didn't intend to make it into a woman's space, they will usually accommodate women if women complain. They'll just say, okay, you can come on in, or we'll change things to accommodate you. One good example of that is the Boy Scouts, which just recently happened. So now I know part of the reason why the Boy Scouts started to include girls was because they were losing money and there weren't as many people signing up at all. But I think another reason is that they were fine with it, provided that they could keep it segregated, which I believe they're going to do, gender segregated. And I've also, there's other things that used to be, I guess, sort of male, I wouldn't say male only, but I'd at least say male dominated. Things like golf clubs and, sort of like the being in a part of a golfing club, or there used to be lodges, where men would get together and drink and hang out with each other in the same way that women would have places where they would socialize with other women. But a lot of the male stuff that was, like male spaces are being disintegrated. They're being eroded. Frat houses are, they're currently under attack, and we don't know how long it'll be before frat houses are gone. So, there are definitely areas where the segregation that was often, if not almost entirely, simply a result of the sex's general desire to be with their own sometimes, and not necessarily a byproduct or a product of discrimination. Like when women wanted to have bridge clubs, there weren't, or I think they, book clubs now or whatever. It wasn't that men weren't allowed in. It was mainly because men weren't interested. In the same way that, when men want to go on hunting trips or go to the range or something like that, it wasn't necessarily that they weren't allowing women in. It was because there weren't that many women interested. So I guess to just to like put my final thoughts on it, as long as these organisms, these like setups are voluntary and people are choosing what they want to do and who they want to associate with, it shouldn't matter. But the way that I think things are going, it seems to be, it's definitely showing a double standard where, women are insisting, and I would say specifically feminist women, are insisting on women's only spaces, and they're insisting to be in men's spaces. So they not only want their own spaces, but they want to be involved in all of the male spaces, and they don't want men to have their own spaces. And so it's good to like expose that and show it and sort of say, this could be a problem, because when men aren't allowed to, they can heal in their own spaces with other men. They can bond with them. There's a lot of good that comes out of that, in the same way that it's good for women too. So it's good to show that. But I'm still in my, I guess, libertarian brain. I don't think that trying to change businesses that want to discriminate, that's just not the useful way to go about doing this, in my opinion, but I don't think it's a big part of what NCFM does. But I guess at the end of the day, I do believe that it's probably one that we don't need to deal with, because then they can't write articles like this about NCFM when they're doing so much other work that's so much better and more important.
Do you think that just, maybe you're saying that you don't want to make the argument from the libertarian perspective that people should not be able to discriminate how they wish in, I guess, their private spaces, even if it's in retaliation to what women are doing. But do you think just making, say, the arguments you're just saying about it can be healthy for men, that's enough and effective?
And
see the hypocrisy.
No, definitely, it's good to show the hypocrisy, and I'm actually for the idea that people should be able to discriminate. I mean, we do it all the time, you know. And
do you think that just making arguments is enough? Because in my mind, you're saying that you don't think the NCFM, I think I'm saying that right, that what they're doing is necessary. But in my mind, I think it might be necessary, because just people saying those things, I do think that most people have like a blind spot in terms of how they see when men do something versus when women do something. Like if they just talk about it, I cannot understand why that's the best way, because you're not undermining your principles. But at the same time, I question whether or not it is actually effective.
Well,
there's talking about it.
There's also the fact that no matter what the National Coalition for Men does, organizations, media organizations like the New York Times that pose as journalistic organizations, that maybe used to be journalistic, they're going to pull crap like this one way or another. The National Coalition for Men could be perfect. They could be 100% perfect, impervious to falsehoods, impervious to being painted with a dishonest brush based on the actual facts of their activism, and the New York Times would still find a way, from a social justice perspective, to twist what they are doing in order to call it nefarious. And that's just the way politics in the United States has become, and it's also the way media work in the United States has become. It's most of it, the vast majority of it, is not journalistic. It's political, and it's been that way since Woodward and Bernstein. And I hate to say it, but I wouldn't worry for a moment.
Bernstein,
Yep.
never mind.
Yes, the Bernstein news. But it's been that way. People used to go into journalism, like there was yellow journalism, which was, hey, look at our paper, don't buy the other papers, our paper is cooler, we've got the biggest stories and our stories are the biggest deal. That was yellow journalism. What we have today is an entirely different thing. We're here to save the world. Everyone else is bad. Everyone else's viewpoint is bad. Everyone else is in activism, and we're the only ones telling you the truth. And the truth is our political perspective. It's not journalism. It's reporting. It's editorialism. It's political commentary. We also engage in political commentary. But journalism is who, what, where, when, why, and how. What happened? Who did it? Where did it happen? What are the facts? That's journalism. What you should think is editorialism.
Go ahead, Aunt Desiree.
I just wanted to say that I'm trying to do research for like a video on immigration, and I'm so frustrated / amused at the fact that every video that I see and every article that I see that talks about like the proposed bills or whatever don't link to the actual bill or what they're talking about. And I'm like searching, and I just keep getting article after article after article, and nothing to, I guess, the congress.gov website, or not seeing the source. And it was very frustrating to me.
That's
like major news organizations.
One might think that's by design.
Yeah. What I usually do when I'm trying to find out about, especially when there's a bill under proposal and stuff like that, I look at articles until I find one that actually gives the name of it, because like half of them won't even give that. You get the name of it, and then you go for text of, and you can do a Google search, because if you actually go to Congress's website and search for the bill, it's so badly set up that actually finding what you're looking for is damn near impossible. And if you do find it, it might not be the version that's current. But you can get a gist of the text of the law by putting that in quotes. And a lot of times that'll lead back to Congress's website, but it'll actually lead to that actual text of the law. And generally speaking, it'll give you the most recent one. Going through news articles, no, they do the same thing with studies. A study, not who did the study, not what the study's name was. A study recently said, and they're good with the unnamed sources from the White House have told us, have informed us, but they don't have any real sources for their reporting. And that's part of how you're dealing with editorializing rather than actual journalism. And like I said, it's actually a rare find when you come across a site that actually does real journalism. And those are the sites to bookmark and to treasure.
All right.
I think we're straying a bit because I wasn't understanding. I think your name is Hannah.
Yes.
What point you were trying to make in response to what I said, in saying that sorry, someone was just coming up the stairs. You were saying that it doesn't matter what the NTFM does, that they would still be, I guess, slandered by journalists.
American media is very polarized. You can get the authoritarian collectivist perspective from the media that most people would call, left-wing or progressive or whatever. You can get the authoritarian sort of religious traditionalist perspective from Fox News. You get a little bit of libertarian from Tucker Carlson, but then he slams libertarians on a regular basis, so he's still authoritarian traditionalist. There's not really there are a few news media sources out there that are more libertarian, but their perspective is specifically libertarian. They won't give you the facts necessarily if the information indicates that there's a situation that under the current circumstances could be better handled by government. Yeah. So you don't really, when you look at American media, you're looking at the political perspective of the organization that the media is owned by and run by the administrators, not necessarily a journalistic outlet. Yeah. So any American media you look at, that's what you're basically. You kind of have to go through and look at a whole bunch of different sources just to get the different parts of the story, and then you have to take everybody's perspective on it with a grain of salt, because it comes from a political perspective. It might not necessarily be entirely rational. And it's years ago when Watergate happened. Woodward and Bernstein were not yes, they really dug, and they got a lot of information, and their news story was award-winning, and their work was award-winning. They were not unbiased. Okay, they were anti-Republican, and while their investigative reporting was admirable, it was still biased. And prior to that event sort of changed the attitude that people going into journalism, particularly those going to school to study it, had toward their craft. Prior to that, it was about informing the public of things that were happening, regardless. And now it's about shaping the public's outlook. And it's about saving the world. And everybody has a different idea of how. And so this is why, like, when you're dealing with any American media, there's foreign media that seems to be very similar. But anytime you're dealing with American media, regardless of which perspective they come from, you're only getting part of the story. And you're only getting the part of the story that helps them push their narrative.
Oh, were you saying though that the NCFM shouldn't try to
please the media?
Yeah, like it doesn't.
Yeah, no, they should do what they think is right. They should do what they think is best. They should continue to demonstrate, their values and their goals and their perspectives, and they can do their best to get the word out there, but they shouldn't rely on making good with the media to convince people that they're a good organization, because it's not going to happen. They might be able to appeal to right-wing media if the left wing doesn't like them, and they might be able to get certain bits of information out. Like, I'm sure if they're working on a father's rights initiative, they could probably get Fox News to cover that and give it good coverage. If they were working on, if they supported something that was a more progressive initiative, they would definitely be able to get progressive news sources to cover that and be positive in their coverage. But to just tailor what they're doing to try to get positive media coverage overall, not going to happen.
And I think they know that too. And I mean,
Are we still talking about ladies' nights?
Yeah, we were. Yeah. Well, I think we should.
Yeah, but it's sort of, we ended up talking about the media because in the end, this is as much a story about the media as anything else.
Yeah.
I was writing shit down while other people were talking. So.
Oh, that's all right. Maybe Desiree, did you have any final thoughts on this? And then I think we should move on to the next story.
No, I think I just said that I didn't see an issue with the cherry-picked lawsuits that they were bringing up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, fair enough. I think that's good.
I do have a final thought as well as writing. I mean, you can see why it works economically. Why, when it comes to breeding grounds, particularly, it is traditional, at least, that men sort of buy drinks for women the first time they meet, and then men buy everything else for women as the relationship ensues. So, the thirsty males trying to get into the party don't mind paying an extra $5 to get in, and they're already paying an extra like $100 a day on their courting processes anyway. And conversely, if you charge women more to get in, women won't come. Like, regardless of the legal dangers, the very obvious legal dangers, is not even economically viable in the immediate, like, feedback.
Mm-hmm.
You charge women more, they'll just go somewhere else where they don't have to pay for their own drinks or their own ticket. And this is arguably, because of, or at least related to, biology. As we know, men provide for women. Women judge men on those provisions. We're evolved to sort of do that. So it's not like there's one club or one theater that invented this idea that women get free shit and men don't, and that seems to work. It's an idea as old as the hills. But do you want to make it better? Do you want to keep it the same, or do you want to make it worse? I think maybe having ladies' nights but not gentlemen's nights might make it worse. And maybe we can't stop it without being authoritarian about it, unless we simply, as you say, highlight the hypocrisy consistently to a wide audience over many generations. It's a lot harder and a lot longer form than simply suing an organization. Not that it's simple to sue a large organization, as we know, but the greater challenge is in doing it without authoritarian changes, by just changing minds, finding where you're making it worse, where you're taking our natural biology and taking advantage of it to a natural degree, finding where you can make it better, or at least keep it at a biological normal. Like, it's normal for women to feel more vulnerable than men, perhaps because during pregnancy they are, but how far can you take the notion that women are more vulnerable than men before you've gone too far? Even if you're still within the law, and you probably are, because theologizing that women as a collective are all vulnerable and men as a collective are all powerful, then maybe you've gone too far. You've taken what is biologically normal and taken it somewhere it's not.
Yeah, I don't want to drag this out anymore because we got 3 more stories, but that is something I was thinking about too. Like in the world of free choices, generally women they're not generally asked to pay more to go into clubs. In fact, the only reason why we have ladies' nights is that it is a incentive to get men to go to clubs so that they will pay to get in. And as far as like women's only spaces that aren't there specifically to essentially get the sexes together and talking to each other, it's all right to point out the hypocrisy. I don't see a problem with that if it creates a dialogue. But I think that gentlemen's only nights may not result in the same outcomes as ladies' nights, because I think that women won't go to gentlemen's only nights because that would mean they would have to pay to get in, and they don't see a reason to do that because we don't live in a time where culturally we're asking women to make sacrifices unless they're like super alpha male nights or something. And at the same time, men don't want to go where there's nothing but men, because they'll say, well, this is just a pickle jar and I don't really want to be a part of it. So I think it can be a bit tricky. So let me to read the super chats and then we'll get into the next story. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says, I like to shit DOC. I don't know if he's saying doc as in Mike or if he means Department of Corrections. I don't know what that stands for. So I'm just reading it out. But thank you for the donation. Frank Tomeo gives us another...
It's not a coincidence. I'm from that department. All right, the gig's up. Bye.
Frank Tomeo gives us another $2 Canadian and says, accusations of rape and pedophilia are damaging. These are old, so. And Redicus gives us $5 and says, pedo is an accusation, so the accusation must be verified if it is to be used at all because people get killed from the accusation. All right. So... let us move on to the next story. Thank you for your donations. I will read them. Oh, Frank Tomeo says doctor is what it stands for. Okay. I like Department of Corrections, but okay, we'll go with doctor.
Wait, so what was the question?
He just says I like to shit.
Oh, me too. Yeah. If I didn't, I'd be full of it. I see what you do.
Oh, I know what you did there. Okay, I hope you don't mind that we use language, Desiree, and I think you're normally pretty clean, so I hope that's okay.
Totally fine.
All right. Okay, so next story. This next story comes to us from India. Ashul, a 22-year-old man, was found dead last week. An autopsy revealed the cause of his death was strangulation, and through further investigation, it was found that his mother had contracted killers to murder him, her own son. The woman, Suresh Devi, had hired the hitman to get rid of her son after he had, quote, objected to his mother's illegitimate relationship with a self-styled godman. Godman is a colloquial term used in India for a charismatic guru who often has large followings of supporters. Devi, along with her lover, plotted to kill Ashul, that's the son's name, after he had many fights with his mother after catching the two of them in compromising situations. From the article, Circle Officer Nishank Sharma explained how the murder happened. Sharma said on June 18th, Amit had asked Ashul to accompany him to buy a washing machine, but dropped him at a deserted location where the contract killers were waiting. The killers befriended Ashul and knocked him unconscious by offering him soft drinks laced with sedatives. Thereafter, the three strangled him to death and fled. Anybody have any thoughts? On this?
Seems like a big overreaction. I don't understand what was the like motive? Like, what was she afraid of her son doing that would want her to kill him? Okay.
I think that she didn't like. They got into arguments, and I guess she didn't like that he disapproved at the end of the day.
I feel like we're missing some sort of context about like maybe how serious it is if he like told someone. Like it just seems like a huge overreaction. Like, is there something in the culture that makes it like would make such a reaction necessary?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know.
This is a difficult one because like we hear all kinds of stuff from feminists about the culture of India, but then when you look at the statistics, like they call India a rape culture and claim that there's an issue of routine sexual abuse of women in India. But then the Hindu actually did an article where they looked at the statistics on reported rape in Delhi, and it turned out that there was somewhere between a 65 and 85% rate of the allegations being false for various reasons. One of which, in fact, the biggest of which, was disagreement between the parents and their kids. In instances where couples either eloped or attempted to get married without permission, where they didn't, maybe they told their families but didn't, but we're going to get married without permission, or those that didn't tell their families and actually eloped, and the families would accuse the new husband of rape. So this is a situation that's like we don't necessarily know. We hear that women have certain drawbacks in their rights, and may, you would think she may have feared her life being controlled by her son. But when you look at what's actually going on with dowry laws in India, it may be the other way around. She may have simply been irate over having any judgment at all of her behavior, or over her son having a concern regarding her life and regarding her choices, and then the morality issue of it, that may or may not have contributed. But when it comes down to it, no matter what fears and no matter what considerations she had legal recourse, and that makes it, regardless of what she was concerned about, unless her son was overtly abusing her, and it doesn't say anything in this that demonstrates that. She didn't even have a remote excuse, much less a real one.
Yeah, it's hard to say because... go ahead, Desi.
I was just going to say, I wonder if this is something common, like women... or anybody, I guess, hiring contract killers. Like, I'd be interested to know, like, what sort of situations cause someone to do this, and if it's more common than we think, maybe. And maybe it's like the class she was in. This is like how they deal with like their
actually
or something.
I don't know how it is in India, but we did a show on proxy violence. HBR Talk did a show on proxy violence. I run that one. And I ran across numerous news stories of women who either contracted with men to kill a family member, usually an ex-lover, that they felt had too much control over their lives, or that they wanted to be rid of so they could move on, or for various other reasons. Money was a big cause. Somebody takes out insurance, or somebody has, is the only person that's going to inherit money in somebody's will. And then the other one is they will manipulate new lovers. They have an existing lover, and they don't want to be with that person anymore, or they want something of his or whatever, and they get involved with a new younger lover, and they get that guy worked up, and they get him to engage in violence, generally intended to be fatal against the previous lover. And it's actually a lot more common than people think.
Yeah, it's India's it's fucked up. to be quite frank, like I had a couple of guests. I did a couple interviews with Jyoti Tiwari, as well as the woman who did that one documentary last year that we watched at the ICMI in Australia. And I think, Deepik Bardwaj is her name.
Deepak, something Bardwaj.
Yeah,
names,
Deepik Bardwaj, and they have a lot of problems with, aside from there being a caste system and their dowry laws, and it's actually a very traditionalist, and as a consequence of that, it's also extremely gynocentric. But maybe that is the reason, according to this article. Her son and the 45-year-old woman, they argued often, and he was extremely critical of the relationship she was having with this man, this God man. And I guess she just wanted to get rid of him and make it look like an accident. I guess it would appear from the article that she just didn't want to deal with. There could have been some social consequences, maybe, for being involved with this man. I'm not really sure. But this is a bit of an extreme reaction, to use Desiree's well-chosen words. I don't know what I don't know much else than this, and many of the other articles don't give you much more in terms of details. So maybe if there are people in our comment section that are watchers that are in India or have a better understanding of the culture or the way things are there, maybe you guys can give us some additional insight if there's anything that you know. I would think that I couldn't come up with another reason why a woman would hire 3 contract killers. And by the way, why does it take 3 guys to drug somebody, knock them out, and then strangle him? I mean, that sounds like the job of one. I'm just saying, yeah. You may have spent too much money. You didn't need to buy that many dudes. You probably could have done it yourself, but she probably didn't want to get her hands dirty.
There is one other potential clue here.
Okay.
This self-styled godman. This description here, a colloquial term used in India for a charismatic guru, one who often has large followings of supporters. That sort of borders on cult, right? I'm not necessarily gonna be insensitive enough to say that this is definitely always a cult, but this is something that can happen if she's gotten herself involved with a charismatic lover who is somebody with a large following, who is making religious statements and maybe maybe taking advantage of her, maybe not necessarily taking advantage financially, but psychologically. She may have done this because she's convinced that her son's a threat to this guy's, whatever you'd call it, ministry or whatever. And it's possible that she was even pressured to do it. So there's all kinds of factors that,
like, I have a definition
without
here.
Any more information,
right? I got something here. So when I looked up Godman just now, just to like add more to it, it says Godman is a colloquial term used in India for a type of charismatic guru. They usually have high-profile presence and are capable of attracting attention and support from large sections of society. Godmen also sometimes claim to possess paranormal powers, such as the ability to heal, the ability to see or influence future events, and the ability to read minds. So they're actually their origins are traced back to Guru Shishya traditions of Hinduism. They are revered as special human beings and worshipped by their followers.
So they're the Hindu version of those traveling preachers that used to sell snake oil.
The evangelicals that can like say, I can like get bit by a poisonous snake and like survive, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the tent revival kind. And that to me that suggests a potential for somebody not wanting to be debunked or discredited and things like that. And This is a situation where she may have been colluding with this guy, and ended up turning against her own son in favor of this charismatic leader. And I've seen both sexes do stuff like that. I think women might be a little more susceptible to it. Women are they're not necessarily less rational overall. But I think from what I've seen anyway, men have a tendency to be a little more skeptical of people claiming to be able to provide unrealistic things. They're better able in a lot of times, in a lot of terms, to their bullshit detector turns on when someone starts promising things that are too good to be true. And she may have been not necessarily brainwashed, but she may have bought into a story that sounded very attractive, and she may have flipped on her son because she decided that this guy made better promises.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like often you'll hear a statistic along the lines of 6 times as many husbands kill their wives as wives kill their husbands, or some kind of percentage of domestic instances along those lines. And when you hear a statistic like that, you need to find out if this is just relating to direct murders, or if it takes into account the husbands killed not by their wives, but on their explicit behalf. And I'm not just talking about hitmen hired. Bear in mind the ones who can't afford a hired hitman, but can afford an ex-boyfriend or a next boyfriend or someone else who's willing to do the dirty work. You'll find most of the time the statistic you're hearing about does not take these things into account. Because how do you even? Again, it sort of makes sense biologically. Men are bigger and stronger, so maybe their go-to when it comes to murdering their wives is to simply murder them themselves and suffer the consequences most of the time. Women, when it comes to murdering their husbands, are, more inclined to use discreet methods like poison, or even more inclined to find a far more underhanded way of doing it, i.e. getting someone else to do it. But again, are you making nature worse or not?
Yeah, I want to be clear on one other thing, because this is something that I am making a criticism of women here when I say women are more gullible to these things. Gullibility is only 50% vulnerability. Half of your gullibility is your willingness to buy into something that sounds too good to be true because of how nice it sounds and how easy your life would be, or how much better you think your life would be. It's a choice to not look too deeply into something that you should have been looking more deeply into. And I think in this situation that applies as well. And no matter how much you can talk about gullible people being victims in terms of scams and everything, there is still that need for accountability. In fact, the best way to protect people against scams is to apply accountability to gullibility.
Okay. All right, so we good? I'm going to read some super chats and we're going to go on to the next story. So, Tyler Preston gives us $2 and says, "You guys' opinions on Comicsgate?" I don't know, he typed on twice for some reason. It was probably an accident. Thank you, Tyler. It's just another facet of the ongoing culture war, in my opinion. Just another thing that that's a male-dominated space that's getting infected by the poison of social justice stuff. And we'll see how it goes. Hopefully the free market works again, just like it's mostly done for Gamergate. I mean, it's not over. Like, that's an ongoing thing, but yeah, those are my thoughts anyway. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says the Indian woman is a psycho. And then he does it again, gives us $2 Canadian and says the Indian woman is a psycho twice. Thank you, Frank. It would look like that. I can't see any logical reason why you might hire 3 men to kill your own son. But, well, maybe there is more to the story. I don't know. But I don't suspect that I'm going to learn anything that's going to change my mind about that. But if you guys know anything on this, or if you know anybody who can provide with some more info, put a comment below and let us know. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe she didn't do nothing wrong. Maybe it was just self-defense. Maybe that's what they call it in that country. All right, moving on to the next story. The Kotaku in Action subreddit was created as a hub for those interested in the consumer revolt and push for ethics in video game journalism, known as #Gamergate. Desiree, do you know what Gamergate is?
I have a very vague idea, so not
okay.
really.
Because I know you haven't been, at least from what I know, you haven't been making videos at all until relatively recently. So when after I'm done with this, I'll give you. Well, you probably have a basic idea. It's essentially pushing back against corrupt journalism that was essentially run by far left feminist types that have been attacking their consumer base back in 2014, and that was ongoing for a while. And there were people who were just you know, they were sick of it. They were sick of being told by the people that they're supporting that they're terrible people. So, and it's still kind of an ongoing thing. That's the short version of Gamergate. After 3 years plus in existence, the subreddit's founder and now ex-moderator took the subreddit down for roughly an hour in an attempt to scuttle it. This all started 4 days ago, when the founder, a Reddit user by the name of David Me, posted to the drama subreddit detailing his issues with the current state of Kotaku in action. In a rambling diatribe, David Me states many times that Kotaku in action should not exist and compares it to a monster and cancer, although his reasons for these comparisons seem lacking, to say the least. David Me does not shy away from revealing his own mental health issues, stating that he has both autism spectrum disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. Kotaku in Action's head admins were quick to rectify the situation, restoring access to the subreddit in about an hour with the help of Reddit administration. KIA, Kotaku in Action, mod Hesmix issued the following statement. David has been stripped of all his permissions. Admins will be holding an investigation via their guidelines into his behavior. He later followed this up with a clarification on the authority of David Me, stating, quote, David Me has never been head mod, and we never viewed him as such. The Hat 2 was always head mod, and then Supernova was, and now Bane has been filling that slot. These are just names of various moderators. David has always just been the guy who created the subreddit. So some guy tried to hijack the subreddit, and the ghost of Gamergate has once again reared its ugly head. I guess the reason why I was just giving you guys a brief update on stuff that was going on. So back when Gamergate was in its heyday, Kotaku in Action was the main place that people would discuss issues regarding ethics in games journalism. And after the Gamergate, sort of like the large wave passed, Gamergate became kind of a, let's say, a watchdog of sorts, where they would basically just be on the lookout for ideological stuff going on in the video games and entertainment industry. But it's also broadened since then. It's basically been people looking at other interests. And the thing that ties this all together, which I think is the most interesting bit to me, is that a lot of these spaces where this sort of stuff is happening, where you have feminists getting involved and they're changing things and they're asking to have everything altered to suit their sensibilities, these are spaces that have been traditionally or historically dominated by men, you know. And this is sort of going back to that story that we were talking about earlier, sort of, where NCFM was sort of exposing the double standards of female-only spaces versus male-only spaces. Now, obviously, things like gaming and like nerd culture and stuff, they're not excluding females. But they were dominated by males. And what a lot of the SJW types do is they go in there and they think that because the majority of people involved in the hobby are males, or even more specifically white males, they think that there must be some discrimination, bigotry, or other misogyny that's going on that's essentially keeping other people out that want to be a part of it. Because in their mind, all people are created equal, and if there is any inequality in any specific area, then it must be the result of discrimination and bigotry and hatred. So they try to re-engineer it. So they try to change it. So they try to make it in the way that they think it should be. And of course, this doesn't rub well with the people that are already there, who are a majority of men, but there are also women there too. So that's basically what Gamergate is really about. And even back when people were discussing whether it should be a focus on just the journalism part, you know, like we just want to make the ethics different, I used to always argue that while that's good, I think that you're not fighting the source of the problem. And the source of the problem is the ideology, because you can make people fall in line in terms of like behaving the way you want, you know, as journalists, but their beliefs are still going to creep in, and I think it's only a matter of time before they try to change things again. Like if you're allowing that, I guess, to go unchallenged, as it were, then you're inevitably going to create problems. So this Kotaku in action story is interesting because what you have is a guy who was a part of Gamergate at the time, but he was probably kind of like a soft feminist, like the kind of guy that would say, well, I believe in a lot of this stuff, but I think they've gone too far. And what I find is interesting about that is that when I look at what's going on in all kinds of other areas, you see the same thing, where a lot of people who are arguing against social justice warriors or arguing against feminists, a lot of times they actually agree with a lot of the core ideas. They just think that they've gone too far. It's like the people who only try to make counter arguments against the most radical, the most insane, and the craziest people that are on their opposition. And they think that if they just do that, then, and they push those people away, or they refute them enough to where they're, they lose their credibility, then everything is fine, and we have, a sense of, I guess, normality again. But I don't agree with that. I think that when you can go after the Riley Dennises and the Anita Sarkeesians, but if you don't also challenge at some point the really reasonable feminists like the Liana Kays and the Lacey Greens or whatever, or there's more reasonable people than that, I'm sure, then you're just going to you're just sort of like, cutting out the worst parts and pretending as though the rest don't have their own issues. And I think that was inevitably what happened with this guy. And he also, he in his mind, he never liked the Kotaku in action. He just kind of tolerated it. So I guess it's not, I don't really have an opinion on what happened in the subreddit itself, but I'm just kind of looking at it as a microcosm of a larger, let's say, trend that I'm seeing, all over. Does anybody else have any thoughts or anything? Or
I guess the main thing I want to point out is this is bound to happen with any group. You have a sort of a wide variety of reasons why people get involved, even if the overall goals are very narrow goals. And you have people coming from different perspectives and different viewpoints. You're eventually going to get somebody who is going to decide that the whole thing is done and over with. Their goals have been reached and things can't get worse again, and it's time for it to be done, and it becomes too much for them to keep up with it, but they don't want it to go on without them, so they want it to stop, and they'll have a meltdown like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I've seen this in anti-feminism. I've seen it in religious outlooks. I've seen it in all kinds of different things, and it's not surprising. It occurs every so often with respect to Gamergate, because there were things that were achieved that were pretty valuable. Among other things, there was legal reform regarding how ads are used. You can't portray an advertisement as if it is a news story. Now, in your website, you actually have to demonstrate clearly for the public that it's an ad. Even though people are still violating that right now on their websites, getting caught opens them up to a lawsuit now, whereas previously there wasn't as much legal ammunition for such a lawsuit. So I mean, I'm not surprised that there was a bit of a meltdown, and it's one of those things. You see this happen, and you pick yourself up and you keep going. And it is important to deal with the fact that ideology contributes to stuff like this. You sort of look at, well, you don't necessarily want to say that ideology is verboten, but the bottom line is it can't be pushed on people. It's okay for it to be there, as long as people aren't being told you have to like this game because ideology, and we're not going to report to you honestly about this game because ideology. And yeah, that other game hits all the marks and actually deserves this prize more, but we're going to give it to this game because ideology. That's when it becomes a problem. It's you let it stand or fall based on its own merits, and leave things as a meritocracy, and there would be no reason to fight against ideology being a part of that.
Right.
But yeah, with all of the manipulation and all of the coercion and force, no.
Yeah, like, well, and this is actually the thing that I find interesting about this KIA story. It's what you're talking about, Hannah. It's like, how do we discuss, I guess, you know, talking about the freedom to, you know, believe whatever you want to believe. But if we're gonna bring this stuff into people's entertainment, then what would be, I guess, an acceptable way to do it? Of course, is do whatever you want to, but don't tell everybody they have to do it, or else they are bad people. Like, for example, I'll ask Desiree. Desiree, you're not a gamer, I'm guessing. If I'm wrong,
No.
then I guess call me sexist or whatever. So,
I'm not.
but you do
I'm not a
have
gamer.
no, it's okay. But you do have some kind of an interest, like you know, do you have like an interest or hobby, like music or things that you just like to do, like any sort of you know, for fun? What do you do for fun?
I paint. I do art
Oh
stuff.
yes, right.
I like to read.
Uh huh.
And I'm into. Well, I'm getting really into crypto now. Also,
Cryptocurrency?
yeah.
That's a hobby?
Yes.
Okay, well.
Well, I wouldn't. It's actually something I do for work, but I also enjoy like learning about and
Okay.
and talking
All right.
about
Hey, if
projects.
day trading can be a hobby, so can cryptocurrency.
Sure, sure. Hopefully Dogecoins, right? No. But so you like to read. So let's say that because this is actually going on in the science fiction. Like, people, I don't know, what do you like to read? Like what kind of books? Nonfiction?
Oh, well, I haven't read any fiction in a while because I always like research or something. But both, I would say both nonfiction and fiction. But I don't know what you're about to say. But I remember reading some story about what was it? Some writer not being allowed to have. It was either I can't remember. She was not allowed to have persons of color in her writing, or she wasn't having enough. I actually can't remember which one.
It's
it was,
probably
but the whole thing
it's
sounded
probably
stupid.
both. It's probably both. But like, that kind of stuff is happening in the fiction community. We've had these guests on called the Sad Puppies before, and we've had them a couple times. And there is an ideological orthodoxy that's being pushed into that community of writers. So it's changing the products. And the problem with that is that, again, you know, if you are a feminist and you want to write a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, go for it. I don't care. But when you tell everybody else that they also should be writing stuff like that, and then you're backed by, let's say, all of the journalist websites that have a focus on, you know, literature, that are all writing about it. These are all the spaces where people who are interested in, you know, books, like they're in book clubs or whatever, they will go to websites to learn about the newest books. And then all of the websites have this sort of, you know, far left SJW slant, and they're telling them what they should be reading and why, and they're promoting stuff that isn't good, but it shares their ideology, and they're, you know, hiding or not, or distracting from, or giving bad reviews to products that do not line up with their ideology, no matter how good they are. They might be anti-Tom Clancy or something because he does too much military. I don't really know. I mean, I know that he does military books, but you see what I'm saying? And so that's what Gamergate is. It's like the same thing, but applied to video games. But then there's also there's a comics gate, and it's everywhere. It's all over. But for the most part, it tends to be involved in the areas where men tend to get together and take an interest. And of course, because men pay into it, the industries become big. They only take an interest when it comes big enough. Like, you know, Warhammer 40K has it. Heavy Metal had it for a little while. You know, there was all these, and it's the same kind of moral fear-mongering that came out from, you know, rock and roll music from the 1950s. that would say, oh, this is the devil's music or whatever. It's the same idea. It's just changed from religious orthodoxy to feminist orthodoxy. And that's what we're looking at with this Gamergate.
I can say that I'm very annoyed at, especially I think as someone who is artistic, I encounter this a lot because I think we actually spoke about this briefly the first time I talked with you, Brian.
Go ahead.
That it's like I can't make art or can't like go into artistic spaces without people pushing their politics that they assume you agree with. And this is, I'm going to talk about something totally separate, which is very similar, which is that when I was growing up in Jamaica and I would be making art and I tried to like enter competitions or stuff like that for Jamaican, well, it was not supposed to be anything cultural, but they would always turn it into, well, your art has to be about some kind of social thing, about like the struggle of the people or something like that, which to me is like, well, yeah, that's nice too, but sometimes I just want to make art that's nice. Like I just want to make art for the sake of making art, maybe for the aesthetics or something like that. And I see that sort of issue that I was having then when I was younger, except that it didn't really bother me as much as it does now. That it's like people with their ideas, it's almost as if the ideas can't be persuasive on their own merits. So they have to infiltrate every space and make sure that you cannot possibly get away from it. Like they have to push it, force it down your throat is how I would describe it.
Right.
And I find it highly annoying.
Right, because it can't be beautiful on its own. Like, you know, when we used to, if you go to an art museum and you go look at the Baroque paintings and the Impressionists and the Existentialists and everything, and it's all the stuff that, you know, it was about the craft. Like, that's the stuff that people want to stop and stare at for long periods of time. That has been lost, and I think that is... it's the same thing in all these other areas, because essentially when, you know, in music industry, in the games industry, these are all creative industries that people are making art for, you know, in literature and so on. It's just different ways of doing it. But with the actual, like, you know, art, like painting and sculpture world has exactly that has happened to it, to the point where if you were to create... let's say you want, because I've seen your painting. So you like to do things like plant life and still lifes and things like this, right? Maybe some landscapes and... No,
actually, that's correct. I mostly do portraits, and I definitely want to say that I do portraits of a lot of Black people, and I hate how it always turns into, oh, this is like Black people's art or stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, that's true, but that's not the main point.
Right, it's just a portrait.
And it's like people will like turn it into something way more. I mean, I think it's powerful on its own, but way more like activism. Everything has to become activism, and like no, sometimes it's not. Like that's not what things are about.
Exactly, but that's what I was getting at, is that today's art, fine art rather, is it has to be activism focused. It has to have a goal. It has to have a meaning. And to prove it, you can go to any contemporary art museum. Here in Chicago, we have the MCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art. If you go in there and you look at the work, I mean, like the majority of it is ugly, but all of it has a point. And if you go to the actual Art Institute Museum, the majority of it is beautiful. And it also still has a point, but it's not political per se. It's like
it's not the main point.
No, it's more like either it's beautiful for its own sake, or if it is making a statement, it's larger. It's like I can't. It's like a low resolution statement, to quote Jordan Peterson. It's like a low
devil's advocate.
Oh yeah,
devil's advocate position. Punk rock is ugly, and classical is beautiful. I mean, you could say, if there's such a thing as an objective statement about what makes art ugly or beautiful, sometimes the artist is trying to be ugly, such as in punk rock, and that doesn't make it a less viable art form. But it's slightly different with visual art, because it's sort of a switcheroo there. The rich cunts with no talent are the ones who have taken over sort of fine art. So it's the rich cunts doing the piles of shit, and the poor talented people doing the masterpieces.
Yeah.
Whereas with music, it's sort of the other way around, so it's different.
Well, but I mean, I think punk does have its own aesthetic, and also, isn't it more about punk rockers are working with lower quality equipment, or at least I think less expensive
And lower
stuff.
quality musicianship. That was sort of the point. That was what inspired so many people in the 70s. That you don't need to be a brilliant musician to entertain people.
It was less elitist, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
sort
exactly.
Of? Yeah. Go ahead, Desiree.
I was gonna say that it's not just about art, but even if you think about maybe academia, which I'm sure you guys think about or talk about that a lot, or if you're learning a subject, it's no longer about pushing the boundaries of like knowledge. It's not about the core of the thing itself. It's about how this thing can be used to fix society.
Mm-hmm.
Social.
Oh yeah.
It's the same thing that's happened to journalism. Like art has always been about capturing a perspective. The artist is basically showing what he or she sees of a thing. And like I'm coming from this from a photographer's perspective, like macro photography, up close macro photography is about getting people to look at objects up close from different angles to see details about the object itself that they might not have noticed previously. The grain of a piece of wood, the fact that there are flaws or variations in color in the skin of an apple, various things like that. The little hairs all over an ant that you don't see when you're looking at it from your height of 5 feet or more tall there as it's walking along the ground. And the fact that when you look at them face on, a lot of spiders that creep everybody out horribly when they, you find it on your leg, they're actually really cute. And it can capture ugliness as well. And it can capture all kinds of like strangeness and bizarreness and everything. It's about capturing a perspective and then including the viewer in that perspective. It's not necessarily that it should exclude political perspectives or that it should exclude the expression of ideas and concepts that are inherently world-saving or, with the idea of changing somebody's mind about everything. What's really gone wrong with art is that people want to limit the capturing of perspective to that one only, rather than acknowledging the fact that, it's not necessarily bad to communicate in art that butterflies are not only beautiful, but they can be beautiful from different angles and close up and from far away, and that a person with very skilled hands and very skilled mind might be able to create a sculpture of one 10 times the size or 50 times the size of the original, or even the same size as the original, using components that they put together with their bare hands. The same things happened with writing. The same things happened with all creative endeavors. They've been taken over by this idea that if they are not inherently political, and in particular, they don't inherently express progressive politics, that there's something wrong with them. And there's not. Sometimes that perspective is just, hey, look at this. Isn't it cool? It's fun. And I would advise everybody to look up a story. Geraldine Moore, the poet, by Tony Cade Bambara. And it's sort of a sort of a statement on that. It involves a teacher at the beginning of the story, or rather a little later in the story, because it starts with a description of Geraldine herself and her activities. But she has this preconceived idea of what a poem should be, and she gives this assignment to her students to write one. And Geraldine demonstrates to her that that is not the only type of poem that can exist. And even just thinking of the story, every time I read it, it chokes me up. And it's done that ever since I was in the 7th grade when I first read it. But it's definitely a story that everybody should read. We should have that perspective on art. There are various ways to express yourself, and there are various reasons to express yourself. And it's important that we don't start narrowing ourselves down to this one little area and say, from now on, this type of expression is the only expression that has any value. Because it's bullshit. For Tyler, who's asking, it's Geraldine Moore. It's Moore. Geraldine Moore, the poet, is the name of the story, and the author is Tony with an I, Cade Bambara, and that's it.
I will look at it.
Sounds interesting. Also, yeah. So to check out. Well, they're kind of old. But we did do interviews with the sad puppies and other things. And so anyway, this has gone way off the rails a bit. So guys, give us your thoughts on the Kotaku in Action thing. What are your thoughts on that in the low bar after it's over? But it's time now to get to our last story. And I think this one actually makes me a little happy. A little bit happy. So.
A little bit gay.
Yes, I'm gay for this one. The Elton John AIDS Foundation has teamed with Prince Harry to change its focus on HIV prevention, education, and care to target younger men in need. A UniAIDS report last year revealed that fewer than half of men living with HIV were receiving treatment compared to 60% of women. These numbers are too low no matter which gender we speak of, but John is looking to address the blind spot regarding male cases. Prince Harry, who also campaigns for HIV awareness, has decided to team up with Elton John to better tackle the issue of HIV assistance for men. John said in an interview that he and Elton John, talking about Prince Harry. He and Prince Harry took part in a panel in 2016 regarding HIV and found the youth specifically were the only age demographic where HIV infections are rising, not falling. He continues, since then, my foundation, along with other partners, have been undertaking participatory human-centered design research collectively covering 6 countries. A critical finding from this work is the urgent need to rapidly scale up men's access to and engagement in HIV testing and treatment services. The plan that Elton and Harry have with regards to targeting men will be revealed at the 2018 International AIDS Conference in Amsterdam a week from today, so next Tuesday, on July 24th. They'll be revealing their plan. So, well, Elton John, if you are going this route and you manage to bring resources and help to these young men regarding a terrible disease such as HIV, I hope you don't mind. I hope you don't mind that I put down in words how wonderful life is. Now you're in the world. All right. So, anybody have any thoughts on this story?
Yes.
You definitely need to start singing with the Gulag Singers.
The Gulag Singers?
The first couple things that stood out to me was how much is it like. I need more details. I would like to see more details, even though I can still understand what they're saying. Like how much is less than 50%, and what's the youth age range that they're talking about? And this one's a bit more minor, but what are the countries? Like I felt like it was very vague.
Oh yeah. So I can tell you some of that stuff. It was a little bit hard for me to find, but I did have a source. So basically, as far as how many, they don't. It's something like 40%. So it's less than half, but not a lot less. The other thing is, as far as the age range, youth being under 24. So basically, men under the age of 24, and the countries, most of them are African countries. There is a so basically we're talking about mostly African countries, North Africa, West Africa, and South Africa countries.
You know what this makes me wonder is whether this is happening in the countries where they've been pushing circumcision as a preventative measure, because it's not. And it may be that there's a lot of young men who have been circumcised who now think that they're impervious to AIDS because they got circumcised, and they're not taking the precautions that they should be taking because they got circumcised.
You know, it's possible. I mean, these are, it would depend on their practices, but it's possible. It's certainly not like the U.S. And I know that, you know, that when I first started reading this, I was thinking, is California one of these places? Because I know that they've seen a rise because they've like, they've tried to destigmatize HIV positivity in California, but it's not these places. We still do a pretty good job of keeping it under control.
South Africa is one of those places. South Africa is where sub-Saharan South Africa in particular is where a lot of the research was done, that the claim that circumcision works as a preventative measure against HIV. That's where that was done, in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's been pushed there by feminist organizations, but also by the American Society of Pediatrics, by several other organizations that are, you know, financially invested in the topic, and it's I would be interested to know if that's an area where there's been an increase in HIV among younger people, because if they've made circumcision common there, and the fact is, we know the circumcision the circumcision claim was bull. The research on that has been very widely discredited, but it's still pervasive as a myth in modern society, and it would be very valuable, I think, to the men of the world to discredit that myth permanently, so that they could get on with actual means of prevention, like mixing a combination of wise abstinence and the use of barrier methods that actually do protect against HIV infection.
You know, go ahead, Mike.
Don't teach witch doctors not to circumcise. Teach AIDS-ridden men not to try and cure it by raping virgin girls.
Yeah, that's the saddest part. It's not witch doctors doing it. It's, unless you want to consider people going in from Europe and the United States witch doctors, which I could agree to that when they're doing that stuff.
Yeah, we have the same witch doctors in Western hospitals as well. Don't you worry.
Yeah. We have, I have another, a little bit of additional info. So I went to the UNAIDS website, unaids.org. And it's interesting because this is where I tried to get these stats. This is where Elton John was getting his data from, as well as Prince Harry. And they try to, okay, so it's basically, like I was saying before, the statistics are, oh, I'm sorry, you know what? It's in Central and Western Africa, only 25% of men living with HIV are getting their treatment. So it's actually a lower number in different parts. But one of the things that annoys me is they don't mention circumcision in here at all. But what they do instead is they say, they make this toxic masculinity argument that the reason why they're not getting treatment is because they don't think they need to, or they don't need to worry about it. But they're not using any actual data. They're just saying that because men tend to not, here's the concept of harmful masculinity and male stereotypes create conditions that make having safer sex, taking HIV tests, accessing and adhering to treatment, or even having conversations about sexuality a challenge for men, said Mr. Sidibe. But men need to take responsibility. This bravado is costing lives. And there doesn't appear to be much in the way of data that actually supports that this is the reasoning behind it. I would think that it's probably not as simple as that, and maybe it is. You know that here's the thing that you might not know about HIV. Maybe you do. Do you know that it's actually supposed to be much more difficult for a man to catch it from a woman than it is from a woman to catch it from a man? Because
I've heard that.
Yeah, the fluid exchange mostly flows from male into the female. And so one of the ways in which a man could catch it from a woman is if he has, let's say, scarring or cuts on his penis when he's having sex, or if he's like giving a lot of oral. But usually the saliva kills. The virus can't survive very long in saliva. So it would appear that circumcision could be a big reason why this is happening, because it would actually be more difficult to catch it when you're uncircumcised. But it's interesting that they're making the toxic masculinity argument in here. But at the end of the day, I guess as much as that annoys me, I don't really care as long as they're like helping men at the end of the day. So anyway,
yeah, I guess one of the things we could start doing is portraying the belief that circumcision protects against AIDS as a toxic masculinity based stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Because isn't that what they claim? Toxic masculinity is just the toxic end of hegemonic masculinity, which is what society imposes on men as this is what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
So if society is imposing on these young men the idea that they will not be as easily infected if they're circumcised, wouldn't that be toxic masculinity right there? Circumcision is toxic masculinity.
Ah, yeah, it would seem that way.
And
And
it's body mutilation masculinity. That's worse than toxic. I mean,
yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I
think
mean,
body
do this-
mutilation kills more often than toxicity, but they're both. Neither of them's good.
do this magic spell, cut off part of your dick, and you won't get AIDS.
Yeah. All right, so let's see. Do we have any other thoughts on the story of Prince Harry and Elton John? No. Okay. Well,
No.
I hope that they do this. That this works out for them. So, because I'm glad.
They're very happy together.
Yeah.
You'll have fun writing down the things you're thinking of writing down, right?
Well, it's just I guess to notice, and they actually call this initiative the blind spot, reaching out to men and boys. I'm just glad that they're actually even taking notice of it. Data wise, it could be interesting to see what this means, but like giving men some of that attention that I think they need, especially in these areas. Besides, like if you prevent more cases of HIV in men, you are saving a lot more people, because again, the HIV spreads more frequently from men to either other men or women. So preventing it in men is better for everybody. If you ignore them, you're not going to fix the problem. So, all right, so I got some super chats here. Joey Jojo gives us $5 and says, gaming seems to be getting worse. Team Ninja is censoring Dead or Alive 6, and at E3 was mostly strong whammons. Thank God for Soul Calibur and Senran Kagura at least. Well, if you get the Japanese version of DOA 6, it's actually got all the physics and everything, so there is that. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says, punk rock is awesomely beautiful. And then he gives us another $2 Canadian and says, toasting you all with alcohol. Well, thank you, Frank Tomeo, for that lovely donation and those thoughts. So we have reached the end of the show. And we did it not too bad, a little over, but that's okay. I want to thank you, Desiree, for coming on and hanging out. I hope you had a good time hanging out with us and doing so on such short notice.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and it was interesting.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe if you want to, you can stick around and hang out with us in the after show. We're going to be looking at this article. It's a blog. Actually, it's entitled Unexpectedly Feminist Horror Films, John Carpenter's A Thing. I'd love to hear what her thoughts are. I actually just watched this movie the other day. Do you like horror movies, Desiree?
I hate horror movies.
Oh, you
I
do?
never watch them.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I can't watch them.
Oh,
The last one I watched was like Saw with all my friends when I was like 13 or 14 or something. I just can't watch horror movies.
Well,
that's more of a psycho thriller. Technically, it's a different
See,
genre.
well,
Horror is a bit more pretentious.
That
And
was
even-
terrifying.
I don't much like horror movies either. I did see a few Saws, and I had to stop watching them because they gave me nightmares.
Oh, I've actually never had nightmares from them, but I still don't. I don't know. I don't like suspense. I don't like scary images. I think I'm very visual. I can read actually like horror novels, even though I don't enjoy them, but I'd never watch a movie. So, yeah.
So if you say you're very visual, so that means like stuff like violence and gross out thing like gore. Does that affect you?
No,
no.
I mean, Yes, it does, but I can watch that. I can watch that. Like I could
Okay.
sit through it.
Like,
But a
okay.
horror movie, I can't sit through like a scary creature like showing up after like 5 seconds of suspense.
Like,
I don't.
oh, okay.
You know, it's like
So-
jarring. And I don't know.
Oh, jump scares and stuff, like where things like jump out at you suddenly, or what about zombies, clowns, demons, ghosts, like those kinds of things?
I mean, I honestly like I don't watch horror. I
Okay.
like anything that's like I can even slightly construe as
Yeah.
horror. I will be like, I'm not watching this.
All right. Well, I will. Okay, so I'm assuming that you've never seen The Thing, but I think it's actually a pretty good movie just as a discussion piece. I watched it this week, like earlier this week, and I didn't even know this article existed. It's a really good movie. But Hannah,
Pretty
Mike,
sure
have
Red
you
Letter
guys?
Media did it. Like as often happens, Red Letter Media did it out of the else remember. Oh yeah, The Thing.
Mike, have you ever seen The Thing?
I haven't. No.
No. Oh.
One of the many classic movies I haven't seen.
Oh,
I
it's-
disappoint people often in this way.
Oh, that's
What's it
okay.
about?
I will go into it in the after show. I don't want to like give too much up. Well, last thing, Hannah, have you seen The Thing? I'm assuming you have to have seen
A
this movie.
long time ago.
Oh, okay.
I see.
okay.
One of the things that I used to do with my brother and the guys, we used to on weekends when we had time when we could, we would go downtown to there was a video store where you could get the B movies and the movies that were a few years older, so they weren't the first run movies, and they weren't even like you would call them the second run movies. They were older than that. You could get four or five of them for $1. And we would stay up all night watching like older horror movies and campy horror movies, B movies, and all that kind of stuff. So I've seen a ton of that stuff, lots and lots, and that's one of them.
All right, well, we'll go into the after show and talk about it. This is a really... I like John Carpenter. When he works with Kurt Russell, it's fucking magic every time. So we'll go into the after show to discuss this blog about this movie, and I'll talk a little bit about more what the movie's about so that Desiree has an idea. I think this feminist woman goes into it too, from her own perspective. All right, so anyway, if you want to join us in the after show, you'll have to become a patron at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. One level of patronage will let you watch the show as just like you're watching this one now. Another level will let you jump into the show and actually discuss it with us. So be sure to do that if you want to be a part of it. We would love to have you. All right, I want to thank Desiree once again for joining us on this episode of HBR News, as well as Mike and Hannah. And Mike J, we'll see you next time. Guys, I probably won't be around as tomorrow night I am headed to London and Hannah is leaving tonight. So I don't know when there'll be another show, but I'm sure Allison has work planned. So until then, we'll see you guys next time.